Welcome everyone to episode 3 of Real Space Raiders. This is Paulie, aka Sky Serpent. On today's episode, I'm joined by Dark Techno Dom.
Hey, yeah.
And I'm also joined by the Venerable Archon George.
Hi, everyone.
Cool. So, in today's episode, we have some big news to discuss. Obviously, unless you've been living under a rock, you would have realised that Games Workshop has announced 9th edition Warhammer 40,000 is coming, which looks so exciting, so unbelievably exciting. Lots of new changes seem to be coming. It definitely feels like a bigger sort of shift in direction than was possibly mooted beforehand. We have so much to discuss on that. We're going to talk about our speculation from the last episode. We're going to also have a bit of a chat about how we approach the hobby and our colour schemes. I'd like to say a massive thank you to all of our supporters and listeners who have downloaded our podcast. So over 1,000 downloads have been recorded now for Real Space Raiders, which we are so happy with. As something which we just started between sort of 4 Archon friends looking to bring something else to the Drukhari community. And we hope to bring many more episodes after this one. Let's talk about what everyone has been up to recently. Dom, have you been up to anything in the hobby?
Yeah, hi guys. I've been looking at converting some racks at the moment because I've got a load of these old fine car racks with they're kind of like a rescue jobs from eBay. So I've got like their arms are a bit snapped off and all that sort of stuff. So I've got 10 of them just kind of like sitting here, and I need to basically get some special weapons into the squads. So I've had to convert using Scourge bits because it comes with a lot of different weapon options in there. And a lot of them have like broken arms. So I've just been kind of drilling holes into the guns and kind of fitting them on like a big, almost like a hand lance for the for rifles.
Sounds very common.
Yeah. And then for a couple of the liquefy guns, I've got some old like melter guns, which I've kind of cut the ends off. And again, because these are rescue jobs, I've had to snap the arms off in the down by the elbow, stick the melter bit on, and then mod it a bit with a few cables. But yeah, it's looking pretty good. And I finally got my Reavers, so I've been doing their bases at the moment, which I tend to use like 3 different. It's kind of like a method where I've got like kind of like medium-sized rocks to go in fish tanks, and then I use fine sand and also kind of like a little bit like a medium coarse sand, and I kind of mix it all together when I do my bases because I feel like it gives a lot of good definition, which is a good tip. And I use PVA glue for that. If anyone wants to know what the best thing to use other than super glue, PVA glue is great for sticking stuff down on your bases. It's really quick to dry, and even if you miss some bits, it will dry clear, so you can definitely see where you've been before. But yeah, that's kind of where I've been getting my stuff ready for painting now because I get my airbrush soon.
Ooh.
And yeah,
what
I'm very
airbrush have you gone for?
Yeah, so I'm getting a Harder and Steinbeck Ultra D, which I got recommended from a friend who has one and said it's a great airbrush to kind of get your teeth into. It's very accurate and it's simple to use. And I've only ever used airbrush a couple of times before, but I really enjoyed getting like how it gets the blends of like the different grades of purples. So I'm really excited for this. I've kind of been prepping everything for that. That's kind of me.
George, what about yourself?
Still working on my flotilla, so sort of like the remainder of my Dark Elder vehicles. Obviously, it's a bit of a weird time with the announcement of 9th, and normally the way I work is I write a list and then I paint the units I need to sort of play that list. But obviously, with 9th being announced, that all the lists I've got are sort of not redundant, but kind of stuck in limbo at the moment until we find out more about it. But I just thought I'd paint all my vehicles because vehicles are still going to be a big part of the Dark Elder army, no matter what the rules do. And I haven't got that many left, so I've just been doing that. So my bases are the most recent sort of completion I did. I usually do them all in one big lump, but I usually glue random bits of cork I've broken off that look like rocks once they're painted up, and I spew them around with some super glue on. Then around them, I've got a mix of sand similar to Dom, where I've got some fine sand mixed in with some more coarse sand, and I glue that down with some PVA glue, and then I mix up the Grenadier Earth texture paint from GW along with with a little bit of I can't remember the name of it now. It's the Astra Granite texture paint, which is like the fine sand texture paint. I put a little bit of that in to bulk it up a little bit, and then spread that around thickly in all the gaps and let that dry overnight. And it's just a case of like Xandri Dust, Agrax Earthshade. I paint the rocks in like a grey tone, and then dry brush everything in bone colours basically to make it like a sort of dried out desert. And then the vehicles themselves. I've had a lot of people contact me about my armor paneling. You might see me on the Instagram page that you can find on the Facebook link. But it's just like a dark metallic green that I discovered whilst practicing with my airbrush about two or so years ago now. And I fell in love with it so much I decided to repaint my whole Dark Elder army in that color. But it's basically like metallic undertones. I start off with a base, like I prime everything in black, and then I mix black with a dark metal. I mean, I've got Vallejo monocolor metal black, which is just a very dark metallic black. But I've also used before, when I've run out of that, I've used just bolt gun metal mixed with black paint, and that works just as well. Spray that all over the model, and then I use regular bolt gun metal, start highlighting with that, and then move on to steel color, and then eventually move on to silver, just progressively getting thinner with my highlights around the sort of center of the armor panels and towards the edges of the armor paneling. Once that's all dried, then I go over the whole thing with I use Daler Rowney FW Artist acrylic ink, and I use the dark green, which has got it's a semi-transparent ink basically, and it just sort of tints the whole model this dark green. But I have tried out when I was initially practicing with the ink, so I tried as a sort of cyan blue color that I've used. That turns out really well with a sort of electric metallic blue. There's a red one as well that I've used that's very nice, and a purple one as well. But I decided to go for the green for a few reasons. One, I've just always loved the color green. Where I work in the hospital, I wear green. My wife's birthstone is emerald green, so it just kind of, I just sort of decided the green was the one for me. I was also semi-inspired by the front of the special edition Drukhari Codex, where there's a bunch of like sort of sea green armored Carbolites fighting a bunch of White Scars, and I sort of like that kind of look of them, and that inspired me to sort of stick to the green really. And then all the other details are just as they are, like brass tones to complement the green, red tattoo like freehand markings, although I tend to use stencils, but I cut the stencils out with using freehand, and then stick them on, and then airbrush the stencils on once the paint's done basically, and that's the final step. But I've still got a long way to go before I get to that stage.
Your army's phenomenal though. Like, you've been adding heat bloom to the engines recently as well.
Oh, yeah, that's inks as well. I think we covered it briefly in the last episode, but that's literally just a bolt gun metal kind of color to start with, and then wash it with I use Drakenhof Nightshade blue wash, and then after that I go back with the airbrush and I start with metal color gold, do a sort of a band of that around the middle of the engine parts, and then I use a purple ink and then a blue ink. Although I sometimes use one of the contrast paints. I think it's Talisar Blue or something like that. I can't remember what it's called, but one of the contrast paints is like a really vivid blue color, and that works basically like an ink through an airbrush, where it's transparent but also really like bright pigmentation. And I do progressive bands of that, and then do a really light wash after that with Nuln Oil. I usually thin it down with Lummy and medium just to shade like the recesses again without covering up the colors. And then that's it. Yeah, and once everything's done and stuck together, I cover the whole thing in a satin varnish to seal because the inks tend to rub off really easily when you're playing with them and stuff like. So when you're picking up your models and handling them with your greasy fingers, the ink rubs off really easily. So I feel like it needs a varnish over the top to protect your paint job, and also the inks dry with quite a high gloss finish, which I'm not overly keen on. And I tried matte varnish, but that just knocked out the metal effect completely. So I went half and half and went for a satin effect, and that seems to work fine for my taste anyway. And yeah, that's it. That's my paint scheme for my army. And as I said, mostly it's airbrushing on like the vehicles and the larger armor panelings, but you can do a very similar effect on the smaller models. I tend to just use a brush. If I'm like when I bulk paint my Carbolites, I did all the armor paneling in one go and then cut in all the details later with a brush. But for smaller units, for some of the units in the army that haven't got a lot of armor paneling, like the Witch Cult stuff, I just use a brush for that. I don't bother with the airbrush on that one. It's too much effort for too little armor, basically.
Which airbrush do you use, George?
I've got a Badger Patriot 105, I think it is, which my lovely wife bought me for Christmas one year, and I think it's probably the most used Christmas present I've ever had. Because it changed just the styles I could do. Definitely changed the speed I could paint. I used to hate painting vehicles with a brush, like absolutely hate it. And as soon as I got that, it made painting vehicles just so much quicker. Like it just speeds things up. But it hasn't like completely replaced the brush. It just speeds your painting process up a lot, and it's a useful tool for that. And it allows you to do things like you can prime models and stuff without having to use spray cans and things. So yeah, that's me. That's my army.
Fantastic. Let's go on to myself. After a little bit of a lull, I've been firing through some recent conversions. So very similar to George, I tend to approach the hobby where I tend to build for events, but with the idea that when something changes for the meta, eventually I'll have everything. So for the most part, I do have most options that I want to take to an event, but not everything is painted. So I've been looking towards events which were coming up, and I've been ahhing about what to take, and do I keep my 6 Talos? Do I drop them? And do I bring back the witches? But then I bombed at like LGT with the witches and work in ITC. But then Jazar's good now, and test the skills there. So lots of ideas, and it's one of my favourite but least favourite things about the hobby, which is just working on an army list over and over and over. I'm trying to refine it. Obviously, it's very satisfying when eventually you might sort of discover like a great combo which works really well for yourself. I think a lot of the times people tend to focus on what works for everyone else in the general meta, whereas I think making sure what you use suits your own play style is a lot more important. But yeah, I digress. So I've been focusing on 2 new characters. So I ordered some of the Warcry Unmade to create some racks, because I was thinking about maybe doing some Dark Technomancers. I like to try and make sure my models are very different from one another, and I thought the Warcry Unmade would make some really cool coven. And I used the Blissful one to make homunculus or stilts, which I'm quite fond of, and then I decided to work on another succubus, where if witches were to remain on my list, I want to do sort of a bespoke circle for acrobatic display, which I've used quite a lot. And I'm currently working on that using the Scourge torso, just to represent lots of sort of like drug vials in their back, that they're just so sort of addicted and sort of jacked up on all of the combat drugs that they just can't get enough. So they just always have like an unlimited supply just going into their bodies. And I've been working on a succubus for them. I've also been working with some more of the Warcry Unmade to make some mandrakes. And
they look really good, by the way, mate. I love them.
Yeah, I know. I'm really pleased with them. It was I was inspired by a guy on Instagram, which you can find under the name Board and Wine. I've seen quite a lot of conversions for mandrakes. You see quite often people using some of the Eiseneth and using some of the Wood Elf heads. The Tree Spirits, Tree Kindred, I can't remember. They're the ones. They're almost essential for a mandrake conversion. But I was never quite fond of using the Eiseneth. I always felt they're a bit too armored. But actually, I think the unmade, they work so well just because they've got like, the flesh skirts, like the kimonos that Mandrakes wear, and it's really easy to sort of kit bash their weapons. So there's something I'm working on. I've still got the Tantalus ticking along in the background, and I've got some grotesques which I'll never finish, which because they weren't going to go into my list, but obviously with the new edition announced, no one really knows what's going to be good. Obviously, we're going to cover that shortly after this hobby section. Joining everyone else on the basing and colour schemes and airbrush discussion, I'm very similar with bases that my sand, I probably had it for 10, 15 years, and it's just it's a box of sand which I add to every now and then. It's got aquarium sand in, some of the old Games Workshop sand with different sort of size rocks in there. And again, I use PVA to stick that on. Sometimes I'll give it another coat of like watered down PVA just to seal it, but I do find when you undercoat it with a spray, it tends to seal it anyway. And I tend to cut up slate and glue it on the super glue. I find the super glue keeps that held down a lot more. And people ask me quite a lot about how I make the reeds on my bases, and it's really simple. It's just a super cheap big paintbrush, which I cut pieces out of, and then I roll a ball of green stuff and I wrap that around the bottom, and I stick it down to the base and let it dry. And that's how those little reeds that you might see in my models. It's really cheap and simple. Again, I've had that same brush for like 5 years. I just cut bits off it as well, and then I tend to use bits of different sort of Citadel paint basing kits just to add a bit more flavour to the bases, and then that's how I do it. I think obviously bases are one of the most important things to spend time on. You might have heard the expression bases and faces before. So they are the first two things that you are drawn to when you pick up a model. You focus on the face and you focus on the base. So they're always really important. I've been told that there's the people that do the nominations at Warhammer World, that you have one judge that always goes round looking just at bases because bases are that important, which is a fun fact. Don't know if it's true or not. We'll find out. And hey, airbrushes. I have a confession that the airbrushes that I use, I buy £10 ones, super cheap ones, and it's really bad. I'll use them. I'll spray the models white because obviously I'm spraying with orange, and I couldn't get on with airbrushes. I can do the basic sort of the base coat. I can get the gradient, and I'm happy with that because I much prefer a paintbrush. But whether it's because I was using cheap paint airbrushes, I couldn't work out how to clean them. So I tend to buy one every year or so, do a massive batch, and then I throw it in the bin, which is probably a sacrilege to a lot of people. But it's something that I've done, and it's worked for me. A lot of my models, I've been able to use an airbrush for quite a while. So anything that I've painted in the last couple of years is actually with my hands. A lot of my Razor Wings and Venoms and Ravagers, that's just all built up, the old paintbrush and gradients.
That's pretty impressive.
Well, thank you. And something which a lot of people ask, that do I use decals for all the patterns on my army? And that's it's a massive no. It's just all by hand. And I find it's very easy to do. That I compare it to the Art Nouveau art movement, if you know anything about sort of art, where it's just all sort of free-flowing designs. And I literally, start off with an idea, and then I use some watered down sort of paint first just to get it, down on the hull of the vehicle, and then I'll move around the swell and I'll sort of straighten one edge and then come back round. And then if I make a mistake, if I can wipe the paint off, I will. Otherwise, I'll just make the area larger and then I'll go over it with the so I tend to work in the grey and then the white over that. And then if there's a mistake where I've airbrushed or maybe some of the paint's gunked, it's just I'll go over that with some freehand just to cover up any issues, and I find it adds a bit of flavour to the army, really. I've been focusing on this colour scheme since around 2015. It took me a long, long time to decide how to paint my Dark Eldar. I went through several different colour schemes. I can never really settle them. I looked at sort of pinks, I looked at dark reds, almost browns, I looked at greens, I looked at yellows. And then one day I was looking through sort of, the old White Dwarfs when they're released, and I was looking at Phil Kelly's army, and obviously they're fantastic. You know, they're his own Sky Serpents, and it essentially resonated in my head that Phil Kelly is the person who wrote the Dark Eldar book, and he was the one who invented Duke Sliskus, because obviously he wrote the Space Wolf book, and Duke Sliskus first appeared as Prince Sliskus in the Lucas the Trickster section of the book. So this is the guy that wrote the 2010 Dark Elder Codex. He's the guy that invented Duke Sliskus, and he's got his own Sky Serpents, and he's got his own Duke Sliskus, and he's painted them black and orange. And I was just like, I should probably do black and orange, or orange and black, and I did, and I've never looked back. My orange is really simple. What I tend to do now is I spray everything black, even the vehicles, and then I'll use the Ceramite White, the base paint from Citadel, and I find it actually goes on really smooth. And then sometimes it might need like 2 coats, but I'll get that on, and then I essentially work my way through the different oranges. So I go from that, and I skip. I don't use any of the base oranges. I go to Troll Slayer Orange. From that, I'll use the Fugan Orange Wash, and then when I highlight, I'll go through Fire Dragon Bright up to Luganov Orange. But I tend to do at least sort of 1 or 2 steps in between. So rather than jumping from Troll Slayer Orange to Fire Dragon Bright, I'll do like a 50-50 mix in between. Sometimes even a 75-25 if I feel it really needs it, or it's like a character model. And voila, you know, that's how I do my orange. I find it quite effective, especially when you have all these different layer paints and base paints and edge paints. It's actually as easy as it's ever been to paint. I think anyone with a bit of practice can do so.
That sounds awesome. So I'm a big fan of your army. And you also do what's quite unique about your army is you do the shard camo kind of style, which for those of you who don't know, it's like in the military, it's like sort of triangular pattern, camo pattern, isn't it? And like I don't think I've actually seen anyone else do that really, especially not with the Drukhari army. Maybe with like a Tau or maybe like some sort of guard list. But I really like that about your army. The black and the orange aren't just like sort of segments or armor panels. You cut into each armor panel with this like triangular shard-like patterns, and I think that adds a very unique flavor to your army.
Yeah, no, thank you. It wasn't done on purpose, but I think it just works that way.
Yeah.
So enough about our hobby discussion. Let's delve into Scourge news and talk about the biggest thing for 3 years in Warhammer 40,000. It is a new edition. How does everyone feel about them dropping 9th out of the blue?
Perfect timing. I think this is the perfect time to get the game kind of smoothed out, because towards the end of last year and the start of 2020, we kind of saw them get a bit mad with some of the rules, especially when Space Marines were around at their like height around LVO. I just feel like they need to kind of not hit the reset button and take care of all the rules, but I feel like they just needed to kind of take a step back, take advice from the community of what worked and what didn't work, and just kind of smooth it out. Because even they said in the Q&A, this is by far they've had the most players playing this game that they have ever had, and it's quite important to note that 9th edition is not meaning that all of your books, like in the last edition, like you don't need to buy new books. You can use your books that you have now. So don't worry about selling your Drukhari book and your Psychic Awakening books. Like, they're fine. The rules that are coming out are just going to be kind of like guidelines on the new structure of how this game is going to be played. And there's going to be a lot more like different dynamics to the game that are going to come up. And there's some really exciting things coming up in the next few weeks, which they've kind of like hinted at with some of the stratagems, which we'll discuss a bit later. Yeah, I think this is the perfect time. What do you guys think?
I think that it's been one of my favourite editions in 8th, but I think 8th is far from perfect. It doesn't feel like the edition's ending in a sort of catastrophic manner, which I'd allege 7th did. But I think a lot needs tidying up, and at the moment, I think 95% of the rules changes and everything they've teased is positive, and I think it's going to be much more sort of dynamic edition. A lot looks just phenomenal. I think the models that they've shown so far are absolutely staggering. I think, Dom, you might even switch to do a little Necron Force, right?
Oh yeah, they look outstanding. Like they've really upped their game. Like they've almost like redone all of the Necrons, all these funky new models, and they're looking quality.
I was actually quite surprised that I thought they'd have the Silent King and a few models, but it's almost like a range overhaul. And actually, for me, it kind of excites me that if they take the 2011 Necron range, and then almost redo half of it and add all this jazzy new stuff, it makes me think for Drukhari, will they take the Beast and the Court of the Archon and the Grotesque, and will they replace these in plastic, but also add a smattering of new units? Especially the Silent King. We haven't seen proper up close images of him. I know we've got the one of him in the distance in the top right, that army sort of image, but he looks phenomenal. And I think if they can bring him back into the lore, and obviously we touched upon him in the last episode about how big of an antagonist he is to the galaxy. If Azrael Vex was to come back on the Days of Destruction, I think this sets a huge precedent that Drukhari could get a similar makeover and get a really big special character back as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. Maybe this is the edition where Xenos get love, finally get some new models, and because I've always felt like the amount of Marine stuff that there is out there, and Guard, and like Eldari, there's like I feel like Necrons, especially in Tyranids and that sort of stuff, they've never really had like incredible models. They've always had just like this will do sort of thing. And I definitely think this is a good kind of sign that they're really delving into the Necrons, because they could have just done the Silent King model, like Nagash sort of size, and then given the Lynch Guard maybe a new weapons, and then redone the Warriors, and then that would be it. They've got three-legged things, they've got floating things, they've got. It just looks like overall, it's just really good for Drukhari, I think, because like you said, new models, all Drukhari players will buy them, especially with the quality that Games Workshop are making all of these models at the moment.
It makes me massively excited to be able to start safely playing again. I can't wait to see the models on the table. I think they're going to look incredibly good. The Space Marines, the bikes are staggering. They're phenomenal as well. The Judicia, the guy with the blunt sort of Executioner's sword, he looks great. I think he hints at potentially some updates to the lore, doesn't he, George?
Yeah, I think. Well, there's been an image going around with a leaked data sheet, which I don't know. I think it might be a well-made fake myself, because the rules for it don't really line up very well. But I liked your idea, which was we spoke about in the chat, which was that maybe this Judicio is like the culmination of the Psychic Awakening, where obviously the problem that humanity faces is that everyone's becoming more psychically active. And the Space Marines need to combat that. And what better way to combat it than maybe having a dedicated Marine, possibly even a Pariah Marine, which means he's got the Pariah gene and therefore has some sort of anti-negative field. And his job is literally just to hunt down and execute rogue psykers for his chapter. I think that would be a really cool thing. And also he would keep sort of like other Marines in line. And I also like the fact that it could potentially be, because his armor paneling and everything that looks very Chaplin-esque. Like obviously he's got black armor and there's a lot of like sort of pendants and things hanging from him. He's holding that big hourglass thing that we don't really know what it does. I mean, it could, for all we know, it could be something like it contains Blackstone, and then that allows him to combat psykers, because he could be like a negatively charged pit of Blackstone, and then that would obviously have a negative effect on any psykers that are nearby him. But I think like the Chaplin-esque vibe of him, along with the Executioner sword, to me tells me that he's some sort of hunter, an Executioner, obviously. And I think it might be because a lot of the Primaris stuff is kind of a nice blend of like Future Mark power armor, but also an homage to original Horus Heresy armor. And I think this sort of Chaplin-esque look that he's got might be GW's way of an homage to the original intent of the chaplains in Space Marine chapters, which was they were put into the chapters, put into the original legions by the Emperor and Malcador in order to enforce the Edict of Nicaea to stop the legions from practicing the Librarius and practicing Psychers. So I think that might be really interesting if that is the way that GW have gone. We don't know. I just want to underline that we don't know. I'm just speculating here, but I think it's really interesting. What else is interesting? I posted up in our group was that all the new Marines have this new emblem on them, like in some places, either hanging from them or it's on their van braces or it's on their shield, which looks a lot like the Crux Terminatus from the original Terminators, which is this like cross with a skull in the middle, but the bottom part of the cross has been extended into like a sword, like a blade. And it's strange to me that it's on these new Primaris, but it's not on any of the other Primaris, which to me, hopefully it sort of indicates something has happened to the Imperium or the Astartes in general, and this new symbol, this new emblem is up, and it sort of unifies their force together. Maybe it's I don't know. It's all speculation, but it's very interesting. As I said, the new models look great. My best mate Paddy, who plays White Scars, has been pleading for Primaris bikes since Primaris first came out, and I think with the announcements of 9th and they're saying how the Force Orgs work, he's hoping that you can just do an all White Scars bike army come 9th edition drop. So all very exciting stuff.
With a new edition, always comes new lore, and they're bringing a new series of books out, Dawn of Fire. You're very excited by this as well, George, aren't you?
Oh yeah, I'm a big fan of the lore, all of it really, for any faction. I think I think it's great, and this sounds like they're tackling it in a similar way to how they tackled the Horus Heresy, where you have an overarching kind of group of authors that take control of the narrative on a broad aspect, but allow the individual authors to write their own book as long as it sticks to the overarching narrative and they don't deviate too much, which to me is really promising because it leads down this road of a huge story that binds everything together and ties everything together in an overarching plot line, which is really strong, which is what made Horus Heresy really popular. And I think what's even more exciting about it is the fact that it's an unknown territory. Like, so everyone knew kind of what happened with the Horus Heresy. Like, we all know the ending to that. And similarly, like with other series that are really good, like the War of the Beast series was set sort of between the Horus Heresy and the current 40k times. We knew that obviously the Imperium did survive, so it kind of took the sting out of the overwhelming power that the Orcs had in that book series. And I don't know if any of you haven't read it, I highly recommend you should, because it paints the Orcs in a totally different picture, like a far more menacing picture, and one that I feel the Orcs are more akin to. But this new one is set in the sort of 40k present / into their future, so we don't know what's going to happen. It's going to cover events that haven't happened in like the current lore, the current codexes, anything like that. So it's really exciting for that because it's all new. Anything could happen. Anything, and we could have characters coming back that we haven't been part of the game yet, and could potentially link into new models that come out.
Dukes Discus.
Yeah, potentially. We could see big character deaths that would eliminate those characters from the game, so to speak. We don't know. Like it's all new, and I think it's really, really good.
Who's the last special character they killed off in 40k?
I remember because they retconned the 13th Black Crusade, didn't they? Where they killed off Eldrad.
Tried to kill Eldrad, right?
Yeah, they tried to kill Eldrad off, and then they retconned it in one of the editions. I can't remember which, but I mean, I suppose the most recent death is probably in our Phoenix Rising book, which killed off both Janezar and Drazar. But then, obviously, being Phoenix Lords, another Eldari just put on the armor and became the new version of that character. So it depends what you classify as died. It's kind of
true. Okay, so we discussed a bit of the game, we discussed the lore, but I think one of the most important things, or something everyone's discussing at the moment, how do you feel about the new logo? So obviously, we've had the current one for 22 years. Obviously, I know the green sort of changed tone now and then, but we have an altogether new logo. What do you guys think about it?
I think it's fine. Like I think it's fine. Like change of logo is always good. Like I've been staring at it quite intently, seeing if there's any sort of secrets hidden within, like any kind of hidden font or But no, it just looks like a new logo that GW can trademark, and maybe it's easier to print or something like that, so they can replicate it easier. I don't know, but it's fine by me.
Yeah, I think it looks better. I really do. I think it looks more inviting. It's not as dated and kind of just needed a change. But this is definitely more inviting in the way it looks. Like the colours are not as harsh with the blue, with the white, and yeah, I just think it looks more of a logo for a franchise. Weird, but it's more of a logo for the franchise and the game. And I definitely think it's better. I think it's good. It's good to have a change. It's good to keep it going forward.
I agree. I think it looks very fresh and modern. Actually takes a lot of design cues from the second edition logo and also Rogue Trader. I know a lot of people have a lot of issues with being off center, but if you look at the previous logos, they were all off center as well. So I think in this day and age, unfortunately, especially in social media, that people like just to complain about something, which is is what it is. Not saying Dark Elder fans have never done that before. True ball. So, moving on. How would you guys prepare for Ninth at the moment? Would you be halting on buying stuff? Would you just be painting? What would you be doing? Like, if someone wanted to start collecting Drukhari as well, what would you advise?
Well, I think what you could do if you already got a Drukhari army and you're kind of wanting to kind of see what's going to happen in the next few weeks or whatever, I think you just gotta finish what you got painted. Keep storming through your army. Like redoing all your little touch ups where you got to go. And yeah, just keep going. And then if you're starting Drukhari, which I got a message about this the other day, I just dive into the lore and just look at what you like, because it's right now we can't fully say what is best out of Coven, Cabal, and Cult. Like we don't know. The game might take a complete shift, and you could see Witch Cult being the staple of all Drukhari armies. And I know that's going to make you guys really happy. You're all about that. But I definitely think, like, if you're looking into Drukhari, which some of you might be if you're listening, but if you have it, just kind of look at what you like. Don't necessarily buy models that are good now, or buy models that you think might be good. Just get what you think is good, and just fall in love with the hobby of it, because we don't know anything about the new rules coming up, and there's going to be a lot of shenanigans with the way that the game's played, and then we're just gonna have to see. Like for me, I'm just finishing my army. I'm finishing my racks. I'm finishing my Reavers. I'm probably gonna buy a Void Raven because I've always wanted that model, and it's beautiful. And I don't know what's gonna be good. Like in when it drops, a load of things could become really good, and there might be a points increase or decrease. We've got no idea really. So I just do whatever you think looks cool, and just stick to that rule of cool.
I think at the moment it's hard to tell people, go buy lots and lots of things. I think spend within your means, especially a lot of people around the world are living in very uncertain times. But generally, when the edition changes, the rules will change. They've hinted that they're going to look to rebalance a lot of points. We know that the new Forge World books are going to come out. So the Reaper and Tantis, who are both reasonably viable, might become really good or really bad.
Yeah, I agree, Paulie. I think everyone should go out and buy 3 Tantaluses. That's a really good idea.
Yeah. And then when they're bad, sell them to me.
Yeah.
I think that there's definitely a lot of things which at the moment are good, and something really important to underline is that it's a new edition and they're going to change things, but like the base rules aren't changing. That it's not going to be that big transition from 7th to 8th. Like your books are still valid, so you're still going to be able to use the rules as they are. A few things, we're going to change. We'll get onto those very shortly in the podcast. But a Talos will still function exactly like a Talos does. So it'll be very good. It might get better because of new interactions, or it might get worse because of new interactions with the new rules. I think this is where you might see the points might change things. I've always felt that. I think we discussed it in the worst units section of the last podcast, that points probably aren't always necessarily a way to make units more or less viable. But say a Talos was to get a 50-point price hike just because it is good and it gets a lot better in the new rules, that might change things. But I'm always harking back to what you said earlier, Dom. I think you should paint what you like and use what you like. It's how I tend to approach the hobby in general, but sort of moving the models towards what's competitive as well. If that's how you want to play, but obviously you don't necessarily have to play competitively.
No.
What yourself, George?
Yeah, well, I think I've gone past the panic, go fetal in a corner and cry myself to sleep stage. Now I'm super excited about 9th. Like, I love new editions because it just hits the giant red reset button on everything. Like, and I think that's a really exciting time. And I think there's never a better time to try every unit in your codex out. Like, literally every unit. Just put them on the board. Even go into the way of making like a sort of Highlander style army where you just have one of each unit in your book and just try them out and see how they work in the new rule sets, because we don't know. The meta is going to take, let's say meta in inverted commas, like the competitive aspect of the 40k takes time to get traction before people realize what's good, what's not good, what's like the best units like math wise or whatever. And I think when you get a new edition, it's just such a great time for you to put the models that you enjoy the look of or the play style of on the board, try them out, see if you like them, and give it a go. And as I said, like, there's so much focus in 40k of like what units are good for kill, be killed, like surviving, maneuverability, stuff like that. There's just so many factors involved, and I think the biggest factor that we have absolutely no idea how they're going to work are the missions. That is such a huge part, because we could say everyone's sort of talking about the new changes and saying how that's going to change the game and change the army list that people use, but it could just be completely null and void because the GW and the team that are in charge of the missions could come up with these incredible mission packs that just change the way we play the game completely and move it away from like the stereotypical kill or be killed and make it a board control game or something like that. Like, it's really exciting, very exciting. I think if anyone wants to start collecting Drukhari, like Dom and Corley said, just read the codex, pick the units you like the sound of, pick the models you like the look of, and paint them up. I mean, the easiest and cheapest way I think to start off is to start off with like a Cabal force, and that's kind of like the skeleton of a Drukhari army is a decent backbone of Cabal, tends to be in a lot of Dark Elder armies, no matter what edition we're in. So I guess that's a safe bet. But equally, if you love the Witch Cult, if you love the Coven, then they've got some absolutely fantastic models that are really easy to put together and really easy to customize. And yeah, just get them painted and wait for the new rule set and wait until we know more before you start thinking, what am I going to equip these guys with, or how am I going to build an army and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, so now we're going to run through the 9 things that you should know about this edition, which they teased with the Hilarious James workshop. What we're going to do is we're just going to go through them really quickly and what they may or may not mean for the Drukhari and how they'll affect the game. So the first one is that the game will be more polished, which I think we would expect, right?
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's I think that's kind of in reference to like they're gonna the rule set itself they said it isn't changing too much, but they're elaborating more on specific interactions that caused issues in 8th edition, which I don't know what they mean, but I guess that's a good thing because sort of going to cover those aspects for in official writing, which will make it easier to play a game.
Yeah.
The second one was Crusade. So this seems to be their massive change to narrative play, where in Crusade you seem to be able to build your own force. You'll see your scouts, potentially become not tactical marines anymore, are they? To intercessors, and eventually rise to become captains, and then eventually, when your captain might take too many wounds, might become a dreadnought. I think that seems quite a sort of a fluffy way to play, and I think a lot of people quite enjoy like the whole RPG sort of grinding, gaining experience points, and be able to tell a story with the armies. And it's something which I tend to do with my army. That every unit, every character has a name, but I rarely get to use that. But I know, that my side rights are called, different characters. But I think to be able to actually take track of that would be a lot better. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I totally agree. This is something that, I mean, a lot of people who've got a local gaming store or a club can definitely get involved with, and especially coming out of COVID, it's going to be a cool way to get your models on the board that you want to start learning the new rule set of the game, and you just travel through with your army through little campaigns and skirmishes. And I just think it's just quite cool, because I've been a part of some like custom campaigns at my local club, and we've like done like household rules where if your lord does something like rule of cool sort of thing, like if he does something like pretty outrageous, then next game he'll roll on the chaos boon table, even if he's an imperial, and then he'll get that stat added to his character. So I've been involved in those sorts of stuff, and they're really enjoyable. And I think it's a really good way to get people kind of back into the hobby after kind of like being away from it, and not necessarily being able to play it. And it's a new edition. Like, people are going to want to learn the rules, especially if they're trying to get used to it with competitive or non-competitive, just narrative.
Yeah, totally. I think I also think it's a great way, because they mentioned that have sort of set missions for set point values. So they said like you could start off with a crusade at like combat patrol level, which they said would be sort of equivalent to a 500 point army. And I know that I've played and I've organised in sort of my local group like the slow grow leagues, or like league game organisations, where you start off with a small army, and then over the course of a month or two, you then build that army up by like 500 points increments. And I think this crusade system would just extend that to a really cool level, where you not only do you get to extend your force and slowly grow your force and paint it up and stuff like that for the next sort of season, but also you can customize it in unique ways. Like I said, get characters that have unique abilities, or units that have done sort of really heroic things in the previous season. Yeah, so I think it's really good. I think it's really cool. And any kind of extensions in narrative play, like I think narrative play is a really unsung hero of 40k. Like I said, I'm a big fan of the lore, and being able to reenact some of those lore sequence in the game is really cool. And I'm really excited to see what Crusade brings to it. I think it will add another aspect and another way to play 40k that might be really interesting.
So number 3 is more CP. Everyone's going to start more command points, which sounds very exciting. How do you guys feel about that one?
Well, I think this is gonna be good, because I think there's going to be a lot of people who are going to shy away from maybe super armies, where I know a lot of chaos players were bringing cheap demon detachments to get the just to get some more CP, so then they can use all their cool chaos stratagems. But yeah, I think it's going to be good. It's like maybe for the night armies, you won't see the loyal guardsmen defending them, because
Loyal 32.
they don't need it. They simply won't need it. You'll start with maybe five CP instead of the 3 CP, or maybe they might even increase it to even more. But I think they really just want to make sure they look after all armies, especially the elite armies like Castodes, just so they can actually use all of their stratagems. Because and Grey Knights have got a lot to do with the new stuff that's come out in Psychic Awakening. I just think there's a lot of armies that just want to be able to use a lot of cool tactics with a lot of cool stratagems.
Do you guys use a lot of command points with your Drakari armies?
No, not a lot anyway. Like if you're, I think Drakari have like not a terrible stratagem like situation, but not they're all sort of situational ones that you use in specific matchups. Like I said, like Vect, you don't use every game, but in certain matchups, you'll want to use it as much as you possibly can. And I don't think there's a lot of stratagems that I would say I would use every turn, except like Fire and Fade and Lightning Fast reactions, maybe, and probably like either Webway Portal or Screaming Jets, which are both quite cheap. But I feel the Drakari army work quite well without the stratagems. And the
How many
stratagems
stratagems do we have that like buff units?
Not
Well,
a lot.
Like in the sense of how, like, sort of a Space Marine army of, near recent could have their 3 predators or fire one thing, use the CP to boost this, or you can boost stuff to like, wound things +1. Lots of armies seem to be able to boost their units, whereas Drakari don't seem to be able to do that as much.
No, they don't. There's the Covens have a reroll wound stratagem in combat. Strife have the shoot twice, shoot again, or fight again stratagem. Then what else is there? There's not really anything that boosts damage. There's onslaught for Incubi where they cause an extra hit on 6s, but that's specific to just Incubi. And there's other defensive strats. Obviously, you've got lightning fast reactions, and then you've got Hunt from the Shadows, which is +1 to your cover save, which is situationally good.
Really good Scourges, actually.
Yeah, it's pretty good on Scourges because obviously you can go up
2 up in cover.
Yeah, 2 up in cover and a 6 up in bowl. Like that's pretty good on them. But yeah, there's not a lot. A lot of it is like movement and deployment based. Like obviously you got like the Red Grief have a specific one for jumping back in their transports. Then you got Poison Tongue have one for redeploying some units before the game begins. You got Fire and Fade. You got Scream Inject to Deep Strike. Webway Portal to Deep Strike. Black Cornucopians is obviously very useful. We've been through that in the Coven deep dive to regen your racks and move them to a board edge. Is a very useful stratagem. There's not a lot. As I said, I think they're quite CP. They're quite good on CP. I think generally speaking, and we didn't get any new strats in Psychic Awakening. So,
Hooray, said it.
So yeah. But yeah, I think that's why they work well in Soupless, where you bring in like an army like the Harlequins, which are really CP hungry, but struggle to get the CP because their battalions are so expensive. But obviously, with the CP changes in 9th, it'll be easier for armies like that to have the CP they need in order to use their amazing stratagems and things. But it also means that Dark Elder will have spare CP to spend on bringing in like Harlequins or Craftworld Elder or specialist units or stuff like that. We don't really know, but it's exciting anyway.
So in the sense that we don't use too many command points off the bat, means actually we might be able to be a bit more savvy with the command points that we use to take advantage.
Yeah.
And basically Vect a lot as well.
Yeah, just Vex more.
So many Vex.
Number 4, tanks can shoot into combat. How do you feel about this, Dark Techno Dom?
Oh dear. Right. So good and bad for us because that kind of takes Reavers out of the game for us.
Reavers might be gone a little, right?
Yeah. I was thinking about this because we mentioned in the first episode about like tagging and what we kind of mean with it, and tagging is I don't think it's going to be an option anymore. Like you won't be able to just fling your Reavers first turn 30 inches across the board to someone who's misdeployed some tanks and they're out of the game. So it's kind of like bad in that case, but then I don't know how it's going to be as a rule because it's going to stop people charging Ravagers 100%. Because who would want nine dizzy shots straight in your face if you don't kill it?
I kind of agree, but I think a lot of the time when anything charges my Ravager dies. Like, because it's usually the things that can get there are things like Smash Captains and stuff. So it's got like from my point of view, it's got me a bit nervous because I'm a big fan of Reavers, and I think the tagging units in combat has been such a core part of the game for so many editions that to lose that, I don't know, it has me a little bit worried. Because there's just no way, a lot of the way that Dark Elder play is mitigating damage coming in, and they do that through using line of sight blocking, through using their movement, and by tagging units that then can't shoot at you. So I think we don't know the full extent of the rule, and we don't know whether the unit that's in combat is limited to whether it can only shoot the unit that they're in combat with, or whether they can only shoot the unit they're not in combat with, so on and so forth. So I'll keep my eyes and ears peeled to find out more on that. But yeah, my initial reaction was, oh no, my witches or reavers are just going to get pummeled, even if they do manage to get into combat, because the tank can still shoot me.
Yeah, and I think with what they released as well, we're saying, because it's on the games on the Warhammer community website, where it's just simple statement, which was become a treadhead or a beast wrangler. If you're not already aware, the vehicles and monsters of the 41st millennium are about to become a whole lot nastier. And it says they can about them shooting in combat but not being bogged down. I mean, monsters, guys. Does that mean Talos? You think? Because if I get my Talos in combat with a knight and it doesn't stomp him, I'll get my haywire shots in there as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I also think as well, like harkening back to the first episode, we got the Dark Technomancer Kronos, which are not great in combat, but they're not terrible, but they are really good at shooting. So being able to get them in combat and then they can still shoot with their auto-hitting flamers and their spirit vortex thing, you got a lot of damage coming out of them from the shooting phase and a little bit of extra in the combat phase as well.
Do you think we might be packing more Dark Lancers going forward then?
Yeah, I think we're going to have to. I mean, it's because you're going to need a way to deal with the monsters and the vehicles, and really the only way to deal with the vehicles is to kill them. And Dark Lancers are our best tool for doing that, or versions of it. So, yeah, I think we will have to switch out. And I said, I think at the moment our best anti-tank unit in the game is the Dark Techno Reaper. But obviously the Reaper is going to be changing with the Forge World rules, so we don't quite know what that's going to be like in the future. But at the moment, that is just pretty much any vehicle you point it at will get one shot by it. So at the moment, that's our best bet, but it could all change.
Yeah.
With most monsters and vehicles being 10 wins or more, maybe Test of Skill could become even more popular as well.
Yeah, definitely. Like Test of Skill with I know that Sky's been using sort of minimum 5-man witch squads with a blaster in each for the Hecatrix, and I think that'll be a cheap and easy way to move around the board and still use witches, but allow those witches to punch the vehicles. Whereas before, using your standard witch loadouts, they couldn't really touch a tank. But before, you didn't really care about it because you were only using them to stop the tank from shooting you. But now that's not possible. We've got to actually punch them. We've got to actually do some damage to them. So, yeah.
Okay, number 5, terrain is rebuilt.
Yeah, interesting again. Like I think when they did the Q&A, they mentioned someone asked the question which I wanted to ask, which was if tanks are going to be able to still shoot and certain weapons are going to be more effective. Like, what's the incentive to play an assault like Horde army, something like Tyranids or Genestealer Cult or Orcs? And they mentioned terrain as their kind of defense to that the terrain is going to become a lot more interactive and play a much more important role in the game. They didn't go into specifics, but I think that's the area we need to look at coming forward as sort of a primarily witch cult player. How will the terrain help us out and allow us to do what we want to do? What about you guys? What do you think about it?
I think more line of sight blocking will be better for Drukhari. I think in a lot of events, especially ITC, you see a lot more of massive buildings which actually can hide vehicles and squads a lot better. So I think to see more of that in the game would be good. I know in the last sort of year or so, Warhammer World, they've been adopting the ITC rule of windows and sort of openings are blocked in on the first floor of ruins. So I do wonder whether that was a bit of secret sort of play testing in the open there, and whether actually that will become part of the rules.
Yeah, that's a good shout. Actually, I didn't think of that. This possibly is right, because they've been playtesting it at all the GTs last year, didn't they? They did it every single one was bottom floor ruins with line of sight blocking. So yeah, maybe it is the way they'll go with the new edition terrain rules. But they said they were going to have rules for every single terrain feature, and then you would decide as part of the game setup which terrain counted as what, and then each one of those ones would have their own rule set, which would be quite interesting. Because at the moment they kind of do that in the advanced rules, where you have rules for forests that do certain things, and bunkers and craters, and then ruins are kind of all encaptured in one thing. But yeah, it'd be quite interesting to see what they decide to do with it.
Here's a question. They talked about sneaking up on your enemy. What do you reckon that means with the new terrain stuff?
Like Cordy said, I think more line of sight blocking, so it's easier for you to move around the board without getting shot off the board really quickly. So obviously, if they do go down the route Cordy said, where there's just going to be more line of sight blocking terrain, then it will help mitigate the effects of Overwatch, which is great because everyone knows I'm not a massive fan of Overwatch, but it does also beg the question that people won't really mind too much about Overwatch, because the tank will just shoot you in their turn. So have to wait and see, as I said.
We are always learning on this podcast. Number 6, the scale balance will change for the game, which I felt wasn't explained probably enough.
No, I think they're probably referring to that they've looked at every unit, and every unit's going to be adjusted for points to compensate for their change in relative power level in the current game, in the new game. So, and again, we can only speculate because we don't know, because that could be power from a point of view of how well they can kill, how durable they are, but also in how they operate in the new missions. Because we don't know. So yeah, but it'd be interesting. It's good that they've looked at every unit. And what the other thing that I felt was really positive was they said that the rules team have got control of all the units now, including the Forge World stuff. So hopefully we'll see less of a disparity between the power levels of the Forge World stuff and the Codex stuff. Because I always felt like the Forge World stuff was either absolutely incredible or completely useless. And there never seemed to be a kind of even in between stage.
Did you ever play against the Alphabet Chicken in early 8th, Index 8?
No.
Was that the Forge World Tzeentch big Lord of Change?
Yes, and it was absolutely ridiculous. And you had
these
little guys called Malefic Lords running along, and it was not an enjoyable game. I can tell you that.
No, I remember that. I played against it was Magnus and Mortarion with the big chicken, and then all that was left on the board was 9 Malefic Lords, and your army was dead in the first turn because of smite spamming. It was hideous. It was absolutely ridiculous.
Number 7, strategic reserves, which could be one of the most exciting changes for Drukhari. We just don't know yet.
Yeah, definitely. So they said there's going to be more ways to use your reserves in a tactical manner. So at the moment, obviously, only select armies and select units have access to units that can deep strike or come on from a board edge. But they said they're going to be new sort of universal stratagems or abilities for you to spend CP on in order to deploy your units in other ways rather than just put them on the board. And I think that's really good, because that leads to more tactical play. It said quite a common tactic for Dark Elder in the first place is to sort of keep your Ravagers or your planes off the board turn 1 so they don't get shot by your opponent's strong Alpha Strike, and then bring them on turn 2. I think having more ability to do that with other units would be quite interesting, particularly with sort of things like Witches or even Hellions, dare I say it. So I think that would be really interesting as well, because at the moment we've got no way of deep striking our Talos. So the potential of sort of deep striking or outflanking a blob of 3 Talos is quite exciting, I think.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting because there's definitely going to be some improvements to the way they make the game like more dynamic for us, because we've already seen with the new Chaos Knight rules that have come out. They've got a new rule which is 1 CP. It's called Encircling Hounds, and it basically at the start of the game you can deploy a unit of it says squadron, so I'm assuming it's up to 3 of the Chaos War Dogs 9 inches away from enemy models at the start of the game. I mean, I think that's going to be something that's going to be put across a lot of different stratagems, which are going to become universal potentially. And I think it's just going to be interesting because I would really like to see more ways that we could get our combat models up the board, because we're going to need to figure out how to deal with those tanks.
I'd like to be able to use the Webway portal and Screaming Jets at the same time. I think that would add a lot of dynamism on me.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, you might be able to do a version of that by, as I said, if there's a new universal strat to outflank a unit, which is akin to the Webway portal in a way, and then you could still use the Screaming Jets to say hide your planes or hide your Ravagers or whatever, or units and raiders or something. So
Number 8 is explosive weapons. How do you guys feel about that? Do you think it's going to be a bonus for us that we're going to come down more term against the form against? Not really see those on the board. Is it something you might be fearful for against our Witch Cult bombs?
Yeah, I think it depends how they define horde. I mean, there's been a few in the Warhammer community posts they're doing on the Engine War update. There's been a few sort of stratagems showing effects for certain units over a certain unit size. So I think there's been 6 or more and 11 or more. My inclination would be 11 or more would be kind of how they define hordes. When they first mentioned about it, I thought it would be kind of hordes would be infantry of a unit size X or above, or any unit with the swarm keyword, because that's kind of what they are anyway. So for us, it'll be things like the Razorwing flocks. And yeah, I mean, obviously, tanks being able to shoot in combat and having extra, like rolling maximum hits against units of a certain size or more will really hurt the witch blobs. But equally, it could work in our favor because we don't really know what they're going to define as blast weapons. But if you just look at our codex, there's things like I always think that blast weapons, from when they moved from 7th to 8th, they changed any gun or any weapon that had a blast template, they changed to the random number of shots profile. So either like D3 or D6. So if you kind of do the reverse of that and bring those weapons back into blast format, and those weapons get maximum shots against units of a certain size or more, that makes some of our guns really interesting, especially I think the Shredder, which is a really cheap upgrade for a Carbolite Warrior. If they suddenly go from having D6 shots to a flat 6 against a unit size of 11 or more, and they're already strength 6 -1 with re-roll all wounds against infantry, I think that would be a really good gun. So things like Scourge with 4 Shredders would come down and just mince a blob of like 30 boys with basically 24 shots at strength 6 -1 and re-rolling wounds. Like, if that is the case, I'm just purely guessing, but if that is the case, that's really interesting. Things like our Void Ravens with the dark sides getting D3 shots might go up to flat 3 against unit sizes of X or more. And again, I keep pegging in the old Dark Technomancer Kronos with his flamer and his Spirit Vortex gun gets D6 shots, and Dom Suicide Liquefy gun racks getting D6 shots. Like all these things become a lot more interesting. And if that is the case, because we don't have the stereotypical tanks with big cannon on top. But we do have smaller guns that behave like blast weapons and could potentially behave like it in the new edition.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. Hordes are becoming more common nowadays with the way orcs are played nowadays. It's just flood the board with models, and then let's hope they don't have enough shots to shoot me off before I win the game, sort of thing. And I kind of think this is a good move because I never thought the D6 shots was ever going to work, simply because, like, going back to our Reaper, it's got two shooting profiles. One's the anti-tank one, which is D6 shots, but then it's also got the other one, which is 2D6 shots, but it's a lower strength, shorter range. But it's basically just, it's also got the added rule of stopping people advancing, which is quite nice for stopping like nid hordes or combat hordes or possessed bombs or whatever. But I mean, 2d6 is great until you roll 2 1s, and then this, what's supposedly like a big horde killer weapon, turns into just like almost firing 2 bolt guns. It's kind of annoying. So I think you nailed it. It's definitely going in the right way if they choose to go this way.
Number 9, flyers. So they've announced a few different things for flyers, such as they'll be able to fly off the board again, which I think one of my least favourite interactions in 8 has been zoned out. That, you know, your Razorwing jet fighters come up the board, but your opponent's got enough orc boys where you can cover, you know, where your Razorwing will go, and it'll just burst into flames rather than be able to fly anywhere. How do you guys feel about the changes to flyers that we know of so far?
Yeah, great. I honestly think this is a good move because I've been caught out before where I wasn't really paying attention and I go to move my flyer and then realise I can't go anywhere because this guy has just strung all his guardsmen across the board, so I cannot place my base. And this flyer just suddenly bursts into flames because it can't move left or right. And so that always frustrated me at how you can't just kind of be like, hi, can I put my base here? Then you can put your models on top of my base, and then we're saying it's there for the turn. And I've just never got that. But yeah, I think definitely this is that the flyers need a tweak, and definitely with the new rules where they said minuses to hit as well, that you can't have the more than one minus negative to hit on a flyer, which, yes, it does hurt us a little bit with lightning fast reflexes on our jets and bombers, but it's kind of good to stop the ATARC, is it, boys?
ATARC, yeah.
Yeah, to stop that, and also it's mainly to stop like the nonsense of what Alpha Legion were doing with the Disco Lord, which was -4 to hit, which is just mental. But yeah, I think going back to the flyers, it is kind of good that they're reworking it, and the minuses to hit is quite good because I do think it does get a balance, and you know we can use those stratagems on the Ravengers and not the Venoms because they've already got a built-in one. But yeah, what do you guys think?
I think it could be the Void Raven Bomber edition, for all we know.
Yeah, I agree. I think I think our flyers get instantly better with that because one of the things that's always annoyed me is we don't have the same movement profile that the Eldar flyers do, which just, I don't know why, but whatever. But yeah, like the flying off the board thing is huge because that's always bugged the hell out of me. Like, it makes no sense. You got this battlefield scene that's meant to be kind of a snapshot of a larger war going on, and then your flyer flies off the board and hits an invisible wall and blows up. Like, I just don't. Yeah, I've never understood that. But so yeah, being able to fly off the board and then come back on a following turn, obviously you could obviously protect your flyer doing that very easily. With the changes to the blast weapons, again, the Razorwing jet fighter comes with a set of missiles that used to all be blast, and having those fire like max shots at infantry or hordes would be amazing, and make them significantly more valuable than a Ravager. And the same could be said for the Void Raven. Like, so we don't really know how it's going to work, but those dark sides could do some work if they start firing 6 shots a turn at certain units. And the bomb may be even more effective, and obviously the missiles as well. So, yeah, good stuff.
Moving on to the recent Q&A, is there anything which took your fancy?
Yes. So it's kind of like goes on for what we just talked about. was the modifiers. So one thing that's always kind of stung for Drukhari players when you're playing just casual games, or if you come across the dreaded Tau at a tournament level, because of the amount of flyers we have with our skimmers and flyers, they always get a bonus against us because they're always having velocity trackers, which gives them a +1, and it's very easy for them to get marker lights on you to get an additional +1, and again some rerolls of the 1. So guys, how do you think this capping the pluses to hit for your army kind of like helps Drukhari in a way?
It may hinder us ever so slightly in the sense that, before our venoms and our flyers are the natural -1 inbuilt, and now it means that, if you had that really sort of clutch venom, which is an objective, you can't, lightning fast that. But I think a lot of the other armies will definitely suffer from it. Dom, you mentioned an army. What did you just talk about? What army was that you were saying about beforehand?
What, Tau?
Yeah. Do you like anyone like facing Tau? George, how do you feel about Tau?
I love them, mate. The fish face freaks. They are my absolute favourite faction in 40k. I used to have a Tau army, but it spontaneously combusted one time when I put it in the oven. So I don't really know what happened there.
George hates Tau. If you ever want to hear him go on a tirade about anything, talk to him about Tau. And as we discovered this evening before recording the podcast, Knights as well.
I'm not a fan of Knights, and I'm sorry if that upsets any Tau players out there, but for me, Tau are by and large my least favourite faction in 40k in both lore, models, army playstyle, everything.
Indulge us more, George. Indulge us more.
Oh, you're gonna engage the rant engine, Paulie. I'm not. I'm gonna try and. It's just I just don't like them. There's just nothing about them that makes sense to me. I feel they're incredibly uninteractive. They just sort of deploy and roll dice until you're dead. And you can't kill them because they just pass their wounds off on drones, even in combat. How a drone manages to intercept a sword, I've got no idea. Even from the narrative point of view, I find it really hard to kind of put them in the scene of 40k because a Tau only lives for like 40 years, and yet 40k campaigns can go on for centuries. You've got like Primaris Marines with like two veteran blips on them, which means they've had 200 years of war. Like, how do the Tau keep up with that?
They must take their kids on holiday with them.
Yeah, they just must. They must reproduce like bunny rabbits. Like, it's just, and also like from a character point of view, like the only character I like from it is Farsight because he's got the cool sword, and he like the sword sucks in the life essence of those he kills. So he lives forever because he just keeps killing, which is great. That's fantastic. But then you got other characters that have recently redone the Shadowsun model, and I'm like, the first thing I said was like, how is this woman still alive? Like, I don't understand. Like, they only live for 40 years, and like I've been playing the game almost that long. I don't understand. I just don't understand how she's still alive. And then one of my Tau friends said, "Oh, they just put her in cryostasis," and I'm like, okay, so she's in cryostasis, and then they bring her out when they really need her. But then, like a campaign could last for decades. Like, anyway, I don't know. The rant engine is starting to rev up here, and it's dangerous. I could start talking for like 2 hours about what I don't get about Tau, but yeah.
To be continued. We're definitely going to bring that out with you again. Dom, any other hot takes that you took from the Q&A?
It was more just of how they were talking about terrain. I'm really, really interested in what we discussed beforehand, how they're going to make all these like ice worlds more dynamic to play on, and you might see that if you're playing like a desert world, you get certain things happening. I kind of always wanted weather to be a factor in a game. Like, you don't start a battle clear day every single time you fight. There has to be some sort of element to the game, and I always think that that's quite interesting. So I want to have I just want to have a bit of a deep dive into the terrain rules when they eventually fully come out, because I think it could be really interesting.
Yeah, I think the weather aspect is quite nice. Obviously, we used to have the night fight rule, like you mentioned, which was like give bonuses to armies in like either the first or the last turn of the game. They did have weather effects in Apocalypse game, which were quite interesting. But usually it just ensued like more death on either army. But it was still quite fun. But yeah, I think the stacking modifiers. My first instinct was, oh, that really hurts. But thinking about it, it doesn't. I think it would benefit us more because there are a lot of armies out there, like my favorite Tau, who have multiple stacking pluses to hit against, particularly against flyers, with velocity trackers and marker lights, and suddenly that won't stack, so the effect of their shooting is reduced. And other things on the other way is one of my worst matchups, one of my worst games I've ever played was against Iron Hands Airwing and the is it the Stormhawk Interceptor? I think it is. It's like a Astartes flyer that is always -1 to hit anyway because it's a flyer. But if anything with the fly keyword shoots at it, it's another -1, and you just can't kill them as a Dark Elder player because like everything that has firepower in the Dark Elder army has fly. So you're only hitting them on like 5s or 6s, and it was just so painful to try and deal with them. So yeah, that not being as effective is really nice, and obviously the aforementioned possessed bomb being like -1 billion to hit, and the Lord of Change, not Lord of Change, Lord Discordant, and Alatok flyers, all that kind of stuff. So I think it's good. I understand why they did it because it was obnoxious and it did make certain armies just completely nullified against those units. And I think it will bring overall better balance to the game. Yeah, so I think that's a really good change.
Just this make you happy, George? Just imagine, so they can only get a maximum of a +1 to hit us, and we can only give a maximum of a -1. So Tau, you're always going to be hitting on 4s, buddies. Always. Yeah. There you go. That makes flyers really good against Tau.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good stuff.
So going back to Q&A, I really liked how they alluded to sort of almost the old school fear and terror coming back, about morale having a bit of a rework.
Yeah, me too, mate. That was I'm really interested to see how that goes. I've been building / brainstorming ideas for leadership bomb style lists for years now. And I really like the idea of having an army that does a huge chunk of its damage in the morale phase by just making units run. I think I was first inspired by that Homunculus Coven story that I spoke about in the deep dive, where there was a coven of homunculi that their whole purpose was just kill as many humans as possible by scaring them to death. And I thought that's just such a funny concept. I thought, could you replicate that in a game? And so that was the main thing that started me buying Harlequins, was because they had a few leadership bomb kind of mechanics that I could incorporate into my Dark Elder list. So I think, yeah, definitely a rehaul or a alteration in the morale phase to make it a more important part of the game is really interesting, and I think will catch a lot of players off guard because mostly throughout 8th you can pretty much ignore that phase of the game because it either worked. You either didn't lose anything or you lost your whole unit. There was never really like an in between that. Yeah, so I think that'll be interesting to see what they do with that.
Mm.
So one of the biggest things which they discuss, well, in my own opinion, is detachments don't mean CP anymore. I think this is absolutely massive.
Yeah. I mean, it's I think that we spoke about how everyone's going to be on like the same CP, and they mentioned that it was going to be based on the size of game you're playing. I think you're going to see a lot more interesting and diverse army builds. Armies like Custodes and Harlequins, Imperial Knights, armies that generally speaking struggled a little bit to get CP or had to bring the Loyal 32 in or whatever to get the CP in 8th. Now they won't need to do that, and I think that's great because those people that want to play those armies because they enjoy that army then now they don't feel like they have to bring in a soup detachment in order to play the army they want to play. I think that's brilliant. The only thing that does concern me is the relevance of troop choices in the game going forward, because at the moment you saw troops on the board to fill out the battalions in order to get the CP to make your lethal stuff more lethal. But now, if you don't have to take the troop choices and you still get the CP to use those stratagems on your like heavy support and your elite choices, we need a way to make troops relevant in the game. I think the only way they can do that is either with point adjustments or the missions. So I said, for instance, they could just turn around and make every mission a bit like 4 Pillars, where only troop choices can score objectives, which I think is a bit of an extreme, but it is possible. And that would make troops relevant and a must take in every army. And if they don't do something like that, then you'll see a lot more skew lists that are just a spam of, like, I don't know, Lehman Russ tanks or Custodes jet bikes, things like that. So because you won't need the troop choices there to hold ground and stuff, and you'll just go all out on all your killy stuff.
It's difficult to strike a balance, isn't it? Because we spoke about the Royal 32 earlier and Rusty 17, and people were taking them for CP, but actually if everyone's fully loaded with CP, but you actually need lots of troops, you might see Royal 32 come back because you need the troops to score every mission. So I do hope that troops don't go the way of the Dodo. I think I look at Drukhari troops and sure, I think they're pretty good. I think they all do very different roles. I do fear potentially for racks where if troops aren't needed as much, I always see them as the resilient deck chairs, and they're very good for screening. Whereas I think potentially in what they're alluding to in ninth, that you might want a lot more killy stuff. That instead of 10 racks, you get almost pretty much another Talos, which might be do a lot more damage than that.
Yeah, I agree. I think troop choices in the Drukhari Codex is arguably like one of our strongest areas. I think because they're all pretty cheap and well costed, and they all do a specific job. Like you got the Cabals are generally speaking the shooty kind of all rounder unit. Their durability is probably the weakest, but they're really cheap. They've got relatively good guns. I'll ask any Tyranid player how annoying Carbolite warriors are, and they'll probably throw something at you. And witches, I love witches. Me and Paulie are massive fans of witches, and they're great. They're a great go between, better in combat than racks, but less durable. And the racks are just excellent objective holders, screeners, pretty good in combat, and great utility with profits with the Black Cornucopian stratagem as well. So I think our troop choices are really good, and I think it would be a shame to not have to take them. You know what I mean? Just because, as you said, why would you spend those points on racks when you could have another Talos or another Ravager or something? Yeah, so it'll be interesting. I'm sure GW have thought of this. I'm sure they're not going to just make it so you never see a troop choice again on the board, especially after they've gone through so much effort making these intercessors and assault intercessors and things like that look so good. And the new like Necron warriors and things. I'm sure that there'll be a reason to take troops, but we just don't know what it is yet.
Exactly. Okay, so moving on, we are going to talk about what we speculated about the edition in the last episode and how close we were with our predictions. So Mr. Joe cannot be with us this episode, so I'm going to run through his predictions, and they were hoping to see that out of line of sight shooting models would suffer like a penalty, like a -1. To see more universal strats, and to see something like Rites of War. So to go through Joe's really quickly, out of line of sight, I don't think we've seen anything like that. Rites of War, I don't think, again, we've seen anything with that. But, that might even come into Crusade or Codexes in the future.
Yeah, I think it'd be touched upon in the Crusade thing, because they said that your force will adapt depending on how long you play them for. So that's kind of a Rite of War in a way.
Yeah. And Joe was also very right that we would see some universal stratagems. Something we haven't spoken about yet, actually, is about Overwatch being nerfed a bit more, supposedly, and there being some stratagems to use when someone falls back, so it's not as easy to do.
Yeah, I missed that from the stream. My friend told me about it, and I was like, "Oh, that sounds really interesting." Anything that limits people's options to like be active in your phase, and I said like limit fallback. We all know how witches are great for that. If there's another way to do that, then that's brilliant in my opinion. Yeah, so yeah, great stuff.
George, you discussed about Fly potentially changing, the addition being more like an 8.5 than a 9th, and there being changes to falling back.
Yeah, so it looks like 1 out of 3 so far. Obviously, we know that flyers are changing, but not necessarily the fly keyword. The rule set they said is basically like 8, but with a few added caveats and changes to terrain and the missions and things. So I guess 8.5 is quite relative because it's not as big a change as we saw from 7th to 8th, where the whole game just flipped on its head really with the indexes and the stat lines of every unit and everything like that. So they said that you can use your codex. So your 8th edition codex is still functional in 9th. So that's quite accurate.
I definitely feel that there's a lot more changes than I expected. It definitely does feel like more of an addition than 6th to 7th was.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it's definitely looking like a big change, but not as big as we saw between 7th and 8th, so to say. I think, you know. But, again, it's so early. It's really hard to speculate because they've only told us like 9 things, and those 9 things were quite vague, and the Q&A didn't elaborate that much more on it. I didn't think.
We're doing quite well at guessing, so we can keep guessing things, you know, see how it goes. Dom, you spoke about Deep Strike, being able to Deep Strike closer.
Yep. Yeah, I did. I thought that was going to be something, but we've kind of. I think. Who knows? I mean, I definitely think it's going to be something that's going to happen, and we're going to have some sort of dynamic play with the way we do outflank. So, I mean, who knows? It's going to be good.
And then to end with myself, so I spoke about flyers, about them being a bit too abstract with sort of flames to hit them, which seems like, you know, that might be changing. I spoke about them lifting more things from Kill Team and Apocalypse, such as the command points. So obviously the command points seems to be entirely different, but it remains to be seen if they lift anything else. Schemes of War, we don't know enough about the missions. However, there's a massive thing that we haven't discussed about. It looks to be that they're moving to an alliance system, which I think is absolutely huge.
Yeah, massive. If what they hinted is true, and like the guys at Frontline, and the world tournament scene and all that lot of sort of combined heads and work together to come up with a single format competitive mission system, it'd be amazing. It'd be absolutely amazing. If everyone's playing basically the same game, it's so much easier for GW to do balance changes. It's so much easier for people to play the game no matter where they are. Like, I mean, I know it was a real jarring experience for me, who's grown up playing sort of just the core book missions and chapter approved missions. And then I played in my first ITC event. Even though I've seen people play ITC, it's very different actually playing it. And it's just such a it's just a different way of playing. The game just changes when the mission changes and certain units become less or more valuable. And if you have everyone playing the same game, then I can't wait. I can't wait to see if that is what they've done. That is a huge change, and I think the biggest one we know about anyway.
Okay, everyone. So that was episode 3 of Real Space Raiders. Time to name the podcast. George, what is your idea?
I don't know. I'd like something like it'd only work on the written term, but you go 3 to the power of 3 episode or something like that. Episode 3 to the power of 3, so it like squares up, it cubes up to 9, and then that hints at 9th edition. But I don't know, something along those lines. But I was pretty dry on ideas for this one.
So I was thinking maybe something topical for the episode, such as George hates Tau and Knights. I don't know how that would go down with our viewers and listeners.
Yeah. They could do a dreaded ninth sphere expansion to tie in some Tau lore into our podcast if you want.
That's it. Real Space Raiders, the Drakarian Tau podcast.
Yeah.
Dom, what's your ideas, mate?
Well, with the new edition and everything, I just think keep it simple, keep it sweet. New edition, new raids.
Well, I love that. New edition, new raids. That is a sick idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone that has listened or watched on our new YouTube channel to what was the third episode of Real Space Raiders. We'll be back with another episode soon. Say goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye, everyone.